Just, you know, relax around the food issue. And if you feel drawn to eat raw foods, awesome, you know. Take some workshops, learn what you can, and begin to move in that direction. And if there's not an enthusiasm for it, then maybe it's not something you need to so much worry about, you know. But what's interesting, what I do see happening is oftentimes when a raw food person is doing a workshop, someone in the group will have incredible resistance towards what's being presented. And they will, you know, raise their hand, and there'll be a slight anger in their voice, and you could just tell there's just so much resistance to what's being said. It's pushing their buttons, big time. And oftentimes it's those people that actually, you know, something's being presented that they don't want to hear, and so, you know, it's actually the direction their soul wants to move, but they're in total resistance to it. So, you know, I don't want to make the statement, if you don't feel excitement, don't move in this direction. Because if you feel a lot of resistance to the whole raw foods issue, then it might be the case that this is in fact the direction your soul wants to move, and the resistance that's coming up is basically developed by your ego, because, you know, you have set ideas about how you want to live and what you want to do, and you don't want to, you know, do something that's going to expand you and stretch you. And so,
do you think from a physical standpoint, purely physical, that these bodies do have certain requirements as far as essential nutrients and other physical?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, and everyone's different, because everyone's at a different place in their consciousness. And, you know, your consciousness creates your body. So you can't say that everyone's the same. You know, different people have different protein needs. You know, a big argument that's always given, like by people that are maybe into natural hygiene or something, is that, you know, when we're born, you know, mother's milk is the ideal food for a growing baby. Mother's milk's 2% protein. And that's when we're growing the fastest. You know, we double our weight within a year. So if that's when we're growing the fastest, that would imply as fully grown adults, we would need even less than 2% protein to maintain adequate strength and muscle mass and that sort of thing. So they say, well then, you know, what foods are 2% protein? And if you look at it, well, it just turns out that fruit and a lot of vegetables are 2% protein. So they say, well, fruit's the natural food for humans, so really all we need to do is live on a fruit diet. And a few nuts and seeds here and there are okay, but mainly fruits and vegetables. And you know, that makes intellectual sense, and it certainly is a reasonable argument. You know, and when we're born as a baby, our consciousness is basically, you know, God consciousness, and we're tuned in to, you know, a high place, and we're in complete alignment with that place, and our bodies are taking on a particular state from that state of consciousness. And as we grow up and develop all of our, you know, stuff, all of our intellect and our ego begin to develop, then our consciousness changes and our bodies change, and we may need more protein. So the key is not to really, you know, decide what you need based on some intellectual argument, but just to experiment and find out what works for you. And so, you know, maybe as your consciousness grows, as you become more aware of who you are, your protein needs will diminish. Maybe, I don't know, you know. My experience has been that it just seems like heavier foods, I mean, the more I just relax and just release stress in my life, the less heavy foods I need. That's just been my experience. And it seems to be consistent, you know. It's like all the great beings that have walked the planet, you know, they've eaten very lightly and really not hardly needed to eat at all, if at all. So it makes sense to me that the more you begin to get your nutrition from in here, the less you're going to need to get nutrition from out here. So, your need to eat will begin to mirror where your attention is. If your attention's out here, you're going to need a lot of stuff from out here, heavy foods, dense things. If your attention's in here on the God within, that's where you're going to get your nutrition, and you're not going to need to eat very much. So, the key is just be where you're at and find out where you're at. Find out how much protein you need to feel balanced and strong, and eat it, and the amount you need may change over time.
And the source as well.
And the source as well, exactly. I think it makes sense to me that, from a feeling place, it makes sense to me that as your consciousness grows, you're going to have a natural desire well up in you to not harm other beings. And that means, if you can get your nourishment from some place other than an animal, that's what you're going to want to do, just as a natural feeling of compassion and love for another being. That, if you go at an animal with a knife, what's it do? It's going to turn around and run away. It doesn't want to be eaten. So you say, hey, if you don't want to be eaten, you know what? I'm not going to eat you. Because there's plenty of stuff over here in the grocery store that I can buy that nourishes me just fine. And so I'm going to let you run away and live your life like you want to. It's just a natural feeling of wanting to let things do what they want to do. And from that perspective, like sort of a compassionate, kind of like a karma perspective, it seems like fruit is the ideal food, because fruit wants you to eat it. The reason being, it wants you to pluck it from the tree, walk away with it, eat it, and toss the seed somewhere else, so that you basically spread its seeds all over the place, and then it propagates. Vegetables probably don't want to be eaten all that much, because plants growing in the ground, that doesn't necessarily want to be eaten. So maybe fruits are the ideal food for humans, but only if you are the ideal human with the ideal consciousness, God awareness, and the ideal life of stress-free existence. And so, hey, we're all living here on planet Earth, and this ain't the ideal planet necessarily. So, maybe the fruit diet's just not going to work for us, and so be where you're at. And the thing is, it's like where you're at is no better than where someone else is at. It's like where I'm at is no better or worse than where Jesus was or where Hitler was. A lot of people are maybe going to be somewhat offended by that, but bottom line is, we're all God. We're all perfect beings, and in essence, and we may not manifest that. Some may manifest that to a greater extent than others. Certainly, Jesus manifested that to a much greater extent than Hitler. But bottom line, both Hitler and Jesus are and always have been perfected beings. It's just a matter of one happened to realize that a little more than the other, and so therefore he manifested behavioral patterns which were much more in alignment with who he really was than the other. So, so what if you're eating meat, or if you're just relax around the whole issue. You just begin to understand and relax with the idea and just the reality that you are a perfected being already, and any issues that are in your life that are sort of out of balance, or you're not happy with, or behavioral patterns that are not totally loving, the only reason they're there is because you haven't realized who you really are. And so just relax and begin to allow yourself to be imperfect and be comfortable with it, because allow yourself to be imperfect from a human perspective, because who you really are is perfect. And so that's not necessarily to justify